Hey everyone, this is George Couros with an epic book review. Okay, it's not an epic book review. I'm going to talk about a book today. Anytime I get to play that music, it makes me smile. I love it. It brings back memories of when the Raptors won the championship. If you watch Tim and Sid, you have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's a song that makes me smile, so I wanted to play it. What I'm going to do today, this is actually, I'm doing kind of 4 weeks solo podcast, and I've been kind of thinking about like what's a theme, and I want to talk about books that have impacted me, that I've read in the last year and a half, things that I don't want to say that I've read them this year, but they've made an impact on me this year, whether I read them a couple years ago, whether I'm revisiting them. So I wanted to just kind of look at some books. But the book I actually want to start with today, and why it's not really a book review, is What Makes a Great Principal, which I wrote. But I didn't just write it myself. I wrote it with a very good friend of mine, Allison Apsey. And I would actually say through the process, her and we were always kind of close. We're always connected, but we became really, really good friends. And she is a brilliant leader, brilliant mind. And how the book came together was I read her book called Leading the Whole Teacher, and I was reading it, and Allison and I had talked about the possibility of writing a principal book at some point, and I kind of pushed it aside because it just wasn't there. Little tip: if you ever want to write a book, don't write a book because you want to write a book. Write a book because you have something to say. And I felt that I kind of pushed off this book because I didn't know what I wanted to say. I had no real idea behind like what I wanted to do. So I kind of ignored Allison's request, even though I was wondering. I approached her about the idea, and then I said, nah, it's just not there. It's not there yet. So I kind of pushed it aside. But then I actually picked up Allison's book, Leading the Whole Teacher. She didn't know I had picked it up, and I read it, and I really, really enjoyed it. And you should check it out. It's in the link down below, as is What Makes a Great Principal. Check them both out. I promise you. And if you're not in those spaces, I promise you they'll help you. But even if you're not, give it to an administrator, especially one that needs it. I think it's beneficial, and there's a reason why it's really beneficial. I'll kind of talk about the process. But I read the book, and I just love the way that Allison weaved in really great insights and practical ideas with research, which is not my strength. I research, but I find the way that I would share it would be boring. And she had a really nice balance. And so it kind of made sense to think about the book a different way. And as I read her book, I messaged her, I said, I think I got it. Like, it makes sense to me. So the way that we talked about the book writing was, part of it would be me telling stories, kind of setting the stage for what we talk about as the 5 pillars of effective leadership. And then Allison would say, like, here's the research that backs up why this is so crucial. So it was kind of like using talents, because I think, there's a lot of people say, like, hey, I really like story-driven books, narrative books. Those really bring it to life. Some people are like, want research data. And I find that is not for me. But the way Allison read it, it was like in small doses, made sense. And so we kind of said, like, hey, let's combine the best of both worlds. And the reason I want to talk about the book today is because the part of the thing was we wanted to not only include our voices and share, and this was one of my favorite books I've ever written. I just really love being a principal. It was one of my favorite jobs ever, and I love telling stories about that process. But we often hear that we really need to hear from the people we serve. So I kind of thought, well, we have these 5 pillars. We have the research behind it, but let's hear from former principals, but also people that have had great principals, and hear their stories. So it wasn't just actually administrators contributing to this book. It was teachers talking about what great principals did. And I think that is something that's very different from what you would read in education. A lot of it is kind of like a top-down, like a lot of times it'd be superintendents talking about what great leader, and I'm not saying they shouldn't, but there has to be different viewpoints, right? Like, if your superintendent thinks you're a great principal, but your teachers don't, you're great. I don't know. Yeah, I guess it depends. I guess it depends. But, we want the community to really appreciate the work that we're doing. And maybe it doesn't mean we always get along, but do they see the benefit? And so we approached some people. Allison did the majority of that. I connected with some people I really wanted to connect with, and the book came together that way. So as it kind of said, don't write a book because you want to write a book, and write a book because you really have something to say. I never like, I'm going to write a book this year. That's not it. I'll just kind of be sitting there like, I got an idea, and I make sense. And it's like, once I can't stop thinking about it, then I know something is there. And that's what this book became. So I'm going to share a few quotes and some of my interpretation of it. But I do want to share one quote from myself in the book. And I think it's really, really important right now. And that's why I want to share it with you all. Here's a quote that I wrote. If you're considered trying something new in your school, ask the people you serve what they believe is no longer needed. And if the answer is, well, there is nothing that we're doing currently that we can feasibly get rid of, then maybe the answer becomes not to take on the new initiative or idea. This quote is really important to me. We are in a time where people are totally overwhelmed, they're exhausted, and they're leaving the profession. And part of it, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing, right? Like, I'm not saying that principals are the issue. I'm not saying administrators are the issue, but I am saying we do have some input. We have some control, and you can point fingers at everyone else, but it doesn't solve any problems. So what could I actually do to be thoughtful about how we actually really are cognizant of how we actually, want people to work in organizations? And if you think about the time frame of the school day, it is pretty much the same no matter the decade that you went to school, whether it was in the 60s or last year. It's basically 9 to 3:30, 8:30 to 3, whatever. It's somewhere along that range. But the demands are going up because we're constantly saying, hey, this thing is really important, but we're not getting rid of anything. So how can you actually continuously do things over and over, do more and more things, but within the same time frame? It's actually impossible. And I think that's why there's a lot of burnout. The thing that is really important to me is understanding that teachers don't have full plates, they have full platters, and there's only so much room. So we got to get back to the plate size, and then we got to be cognizant of what's on there. That to me is a really important thing. So when you think about all of the stuff that's going on with mental health, people feeling overwhelmed, wanting to leave their profession, the thing is not to point to others, even though it could be justified. It is to say, what do I have control over, and what can I actually do? And one of the things I truly believe is there are things that we have to just be very explicit about taking off of the plate, because we need to continuously progress and grow. There's things that we should do that we've always done. I do believe that. I don't think we should get rid of reading and writing or anything like that. But I do think we have to say, like, hey, is this thing really working for us? Is this serving us? Do we need to continuously do this? Do we have this down? Is it something we don't have to think about? Are we just adding initiatives? So that to me is really important. And I'll give you an example, because I think it's important to provide examples. We wanted to go to a portfolio system in our schools, and we want our students to have this, but we want our teachers to really understand it from the viewpoint of a learner. So when we went to that process, I wanted all my teachers to have their own portfolios. So now you're thinking, this guy's saying don't overwhelm people, right? And he's adding another thing. But this was the important aspect. First of all, if we wanted our students to do this, the teachers had to understand it in some capacity. So they're going to have to learn it anyway. But what a lot of times is we have student portfolios, teacher portfolios using two different platforms. So the teacher now has to learn two instead of one. That's an issue. So we said, hey, let's get rid of that. We want our teachers using the same thing the kids are using. So there is that thing. But we were already doing evaluation in some capacity. And what we actually had said was, hey, here are the things that we've done in the past. You don't need to worry about that. We're getting rid of that. We're not doing that anymore. So here are the explicit things we are getting rid of in this process. So we're moving to this space. And what we want to do is really rethink how we are leading interviews, doing parent-teacher nights, and really focusing on learning. So when I was doing the evaluation of our teachers, typically it was like me kind of visiting them faking what they were doing, and then giving some feedback based on what I saw for like a 10, 20-minute period. What was now happening is because they were actually doing their own portfolios, the conversation was really, okay, where are you really strong? Where do you need to grow? And they led the conversation, which is much more powerful, is when you can really kind of self-assess what you're doing. What you're building is people that don't necessarily need you, because you're getting them to kind of figure out their own pathway forward. the reason I did that is because that's what I wanted staff to do with the students. We want our students to take control, because if a student walks to school and they're still dependent on the teacher for their learning, you haven't done your job. So how do we actually model that when we're actually doing a top-down approach, not actually listening to the people who are doing the learning? So it's very explicit that, hey, I know we're doing these things now, but we're moving to this. We're done with those things. So I think staff, and then part of it too is staff saw the value of it because they saw the benefit of it for learning. And I'm paraphrasing this. Somebody said to me once that, teachers aren't scared of change. They're scared of doing new things that have no impact on student learning. So I had to really kind of like explain, hey, this new thing that we're doing, and we're getting rid of some stuff, here's why it's actually going to be hugely beneficial to what we're doing next. So I just wanted to share that from my one quote. All right, the next quote. Dr. Mary Hemphill. If you don't know Mary, brilliant leader. I've connected with her for several years. Really excited. She's actually having a new book coming out in 2025 with Impress. So I'm looking for that. So here's one thing that she shared, and I want to share some of my insights on this. To truly transform the educational experience, school leaders must actively involve students in the decision-making process. By creating platforms for student voice, such as student councils, advisory boards, or regular feedback sessions, leaders empower students to contribute their perspectives, ideas, and aspirations. This not only fosters a sense of ownership and engagement, but also ensures that decisions are made with deep understandings of student needs and aspirations, from Dr. Mary Hemphill. So here's some insights from this too. Student voice and contribution does matter, but it doesn't mean you do everything the kids do, because we would have 18-hour recess, by the way. So this is a really important thing, right? Like when I was on the student council, and I remember I'm like, we're going to have longer lunches. We're going to, like, I couldn't do any of those things. So, sometimes, they're still kids. So that's an important factor. I know we're not supposed to say that. Yeah, they're kids. They don't know everything, but we still want some ownership over the process. So it's not saying, hey, we listen to whatever kids say and we just do that thing. I don't think that's what Mary's saying either, but we do want them to kind of be a voice, part of the process, and we want to guide them through it. So when I saw Mary's quote, this is one thing that kind of stuck out to me. There's all these student voice conferences, and I think they can be powerful, but people are patting themselves on the backs. Like we heard the students. I'm like, well, what'd you do with the information? Like you ask these kids stuff, and then you're just like, oh, good job, but then don't do anything. So for me, what is really important is that you say like, hey, because of what your input was and because of the things that you said, here's the things that we are going to do because of it, so that you make a clear through line between here's what the students said, here's the feedback we got from them, and then also what we're doing moving forward. Or here's what the students said, here's what we can't do, and here's why. So actually, like, hey, we want to hear your voice, we want to hear it, but there's not, like, hey, guess what? We can't do 18-hour recess, and here's why. Okay, so that's something I think is really important. And there is a meme, and I'm going to paraphrase it. This is really, really powerful. And it made me laugh. It said, hey, I want to actually hear from the valedictorian at the end of the year, but I also want to hear from the student with the worst grades. I want to hear both sides of the story. And I thought it was so funny, but there is some truth to that a lot of times we ask our students where school really works for them, their input, but also then we kind of like ignore the students. And if we're being honest, is because a lot of schools are scared to send kids, that aren't doing well because it somehow makes them look bad, but then you're not really getting good feedback. Very good friend of mine, Deidre Raymer, just a brilliant mind, superintendent in Milwaukee. She actually did something I saw. She brought a bunch of administrators together, and then she had a bunch of students who basically went to alternative programs, maybe dropped out of school, and they talked to those administrators saying, this is why we left. This is why it didn't work. And it was just such an amazing thing to hear from students, and then listen to the conversations about, like, how do we actually create a space where these kids that, dropped out, this doesn't happen again in the future based on this feedback, right? And that to me is important. So I think Mary made such a good point on that too. Just love her. She's absolutely brilliant mind. So looking forward to her book coming out. All right. Next quote. Dr. Marcus Belin, amazing leader from the Illinois area. So honored he's part of this book as well. Being an authentic leader means leading with honest, sincere intentions while maintaining a high level of integrity. This quote stuck out to me. Really being who you are, right? being who you are. I was listening to some podcast today. I can't remember, but it really stuck to me is that the person that I listen to on the podcast is the same person when they're not on the podcast. One of the best compliments that I've ever received is that, hey, like, you're kind of just the same guy no matter what. I'm like, yeah, I am. And that to me is an important thing. I don't want to like have a persona, pretend I'm something I'm not, and I say things that maybe kind of push people, and that's kind of the challenge. That's how I think. That's how I want to share. And one of the things that I notice is that if people are being honest about what they're trying to do, they don't stutter. They just tell you straight up what it is. They go clearly. But when they're like kind of like working through it, they're not totally being authentic. We need this more in education. People saying like, hey, this is what it is. Here's the reality. Here's the issue. But there's a lot of like, we're worried about offending someone being bothered. And I think that if we're really trying to make things happen, then we have to be honest with what's happening. I'll give you an example of my own principalship, what I'm talking about. I used to tell my staff that, hey, if I actually ask you for input or advice on something, I am honestly listening to it. And I might change the direction based on what you're asking. And I remember one in particular moment, I was so against what my staff was saying. Like had such a different vision. But, and I like said to them, I like do not agree with you. But then I actually went their direction. And my assistant principal at the time said, that I know that was hard for you, but you did the right thing. And so even because it was like the overwhelming consensus, and I said, like, I can't like say to you, I want your feedback. And then 99% of you disagree with me, but I said, I'm still going my way. And that was hard. I'm not gonna lie. It was hard. And they knew it. And I was honest. I'm like, I don't agree, but I'm listening to you. I asked for your feedback. You haven't changed your minds after I presented my viewpoint. So we'll continue on this way. And I think that's okay. But the other thing too, is I used to say to my staff, if I actually present something to you and I tell you, it doesn't matter what your feedback is, I'm telling you that because I don't want to waste your time. This is something a superintendent's making me do. This is something that's happening down from a school, district level, or provincial level, state level, whatever. So you can complain about what you want. You can push back. You can challenge me. At the end of the day, it's not going to matter because this is what's happening because that's what it is. And I did that because I wanted people to, like, I didn't want to play this game that I pretended that their feedback would matter in that moment. They had all the opportunity to vent, and I was okay with that. But I never wanted them to think that what they were going to say could change anything in the direction. And that to me is the most valuable thing we have in the world is time. I don't want to waste your time by pretending something could happen when it can't. So that, and again, that could bother some people, but I didn't want to I think it would bother me more if you pretended that my feedback mattered when you couldn't change anything. If you ask me for it and then you can't do anything different because of what I say to you, even if it's a good point, don't waste my time. Just tell me what it is. You're the boss. I get it. Okay. So that to me is like that high level of integrity is, it really is about like being honest, being right up in the front. Sometimes when I go into a new organization, they kind of sometimes they'll say we kind of got this thing, and they won't tell me. I'm like, just tell me what's going on. Give me a clear view. I'm not going to be offended. I'm not going to look down on anybody. But if I don't know the problem, I can't really help you. If you're kind of around the problem and I have to figure it out along the way, just tell me straight up, because then I'm here to serve you. So tell me, I'm not going to be bothered by it at all, because sometimes, sometimes the best path is a straight line. So that to me is, I really appreciate that. And I don't know, to be honest with you, these are my own interpretations of this quote. This is why you read the book, because they have Marcus, Mary have really great insights on this stuff. So I just wanted to share that with you. All right, last one I'm going to talk about. Mike Kleba. Love Mike. Mike's an incredible person. He says this: the point is, it's not what you have when you lead at school. It's what you do with what you have. It's not the plane, it's the pilot. So moving from Canada to the US, there's something that's a little bit different in how schools are funded in Canada. And it's basically schools where I'm from in Alberta, public schools are funded at a provincial level. So let's say you're a grade 3 student. Every grade 3 student, no matter where they're at in the province, gets the same amount of funding per kid. The thing that I've heard in the US for years and years and years is that while it's totally inequitable because property taxes, kids get more at this community than they get in this community. I understand that. I understand that. But here's why I wanted to bring this up. There's so many inequities, so many issues. There's a lot of kids not getting really incredible learning opportunities in the schools where everyone's getting the same allocation of funding. Now, I understand why that's really, really important, but understand that I've seen when everyone gets the exact same thing, there's still issues. And that goes down to how we lead our schools, how we view what we have, how we have access. And that to me is a really important aspect of Mike's quote. I was just actually in Forney, Texas, Forney SD with Dr. Justin Terry. If you check out the OC, I've mentioned it a few times already. Check out the OC. They're a public school. They're a public organization. They have one of the most incredible learning spaces you ever see. If you check out the OC.net in the link down below, it's just a rethinking what they're doing. And one of the things that Justin talked to me about was he was actually really inspired by Innovate Inside the Box, the ideas behind it, that basically, hey, we have to identify what we have. What's the budget? What's the thing that we have? How do we innovate inside those constraints? And one of the jokes I kind of make all the time is like, who's been in education 25 years, right? Anyone in 25 plus years in this room? Bunch of people put their hand up. Okay, what was the year you had so much money? And everyone laughs because this has never come. But why can some schools create these really incredible things while some just say, oh, we can't do that because of this, right? A lot of times when I share stuff like from my Canadian experience, they're like, well, we can't do that because blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, listen, I'm not telling you to do the exact same thing, but what does this look like in your constraint? If you just dismiss the idea because you don't have exactly the same thing that I had, it is a totally different way of thinking. One of the things we did in our school, we actually had the same amount of budget, but we went one-to-one devices when other schools weren't able to do it. And it wasn't because we had the same amount of money, but we started saying, look, if we go one-to-one, what can we actually reduce? Do we need the same paper budget? Do we need the same photocopier budget? Do we need all these things? So we just said, hey, like we can get every kid a device. And once they have the device, it's going to change the way we do things in school. So we can now move from, budget A to budget B and increase this. We actually had every kid in our school actually get a laptop in a time when other schools were cutting staff. And it was so important to me that not one staff member was cut while we were giving kids devices, because somebody would say to me, well, now you're cutting staff and you're giving these kids devices. You're like replacing teacher computers. That never happened. So I had to be very thoughtful of this, but it was like saying, okay, here's the rethinking of how we spend our budget. It's not just like put it in the same bucket every year after year after year after year. We have to think differently about this stuff. So that to me is what really, really mattered from Mike's quote. That idea, it's not the plane, it's the pilot. How you think of what you have really, really matters, and how you utilize it and leverage it. And this is something I've been talking about quite a bit lately. I struggle with, attention deficit. And that's something is to me, I kind of all over the place, but it's also beneficial because I can throw up a quote and my mind just moves. I can tell stories off the cuff, whatever. I basically pull up 4 quotes and I look at them and I say, okay, here's a story. I didn't write any notes before. Do this. That ability where my mind's totally racing, I think is actually beneficial in some ways, but some people see as a total detriment. Sometimes what we actually perceive as a weakness could be utilized as a strength, depending on how we see it. So that is coming out through the book. I wanted to share those quotes with you. You can see them all down below in the description. But I just want to advocate for this book. It is an amazing book, and I loved writing it, but I'm telling you, it's the book that I wish I had when I was a principal, because as I was reading it myself, I was like, I wish I had this, like hearing from perspectives of teachers, students, talk about what great principals did for them. It is really, really powerful. So I hope you enjoyed some of my insights from this. Next week, I'll be back with another book. And so when I go through that, I'll probably share something I didn't write. Maybe, who knows? We'll see kind of how it goes. But I just want to share some insights with you. I hope you have an incredible day. Thanks so much for taking part of your time out of the day. I hope I pushed your thinking, made you challenge you, made you smile, whatever you needed today. Thanks again for being here. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.